experience the unity of thought that we sometimes seek can be, sadly, at times distressing. So if you gathered last week at the installation, you probably noticed that there were people gathered here with religious beliefs that were very different than other people. The most common response was, I didn't realize that a Baptist minister could say things that we believe in. So, it's an experience for all of us. And unfortunately, one of the readings that was not shared, since the Franciscan friar who was going to read it was unable to attend, that reading came from the Sufi tradition, and it was to weave in yet another perspective on faith. Because it was important to me to represent the breadth and depth of the religious life in which I participate. In recent years, amidst the negative voices that dissuade faith traditions from working together, Unitarian Universalism has been one of the voices encouraging a focus on the unifying principles among religions. Of course, we know that we have only to look at the golden rule found in some form in all the world's religions to support the belief in unified beliefs among religions. And how many of us, myself included, use Houston Smith's image of one mountain, many paths when talking about the unity of the human family or even universalism? And yet we know too well that claiming we are part of one human family does not mean that we understand how to work together or that many of our core beliefs are similar. Our task as Unitarian Universalists is to find ways to understand the differences among religions so that we can help build interfaith understanding. Last year, I had some wonderful conversations with a religion professor at Virginia Commonwealth University who introduced me to recent books that focus not on interfaith understanding, but on the faith beliefs that are not and never will be in harmony with one another. Juliana and I explored how focusing on the many paths, one destination metaphor engages us in a kind of simplified pluralism. In other words, we look at our commonly held beliefs among religions, and though we know there are major differences, we tend to only talk about the places where we agree. We don't take the risk or the time to explore the depth of our divergent beliefs. And yet, if we are to truly honor our diversity, then we need to engage in deeper dialogue about those differences. Deeper conversations about our differences will become more important in future years as not only this Unitarian Universalist community, but our society at large becomes more diverse. Over the past few years, I had the privilege of participating in an interfaith listening circle with people who are Muslim, Christian, and Jewish. Each one of us was committed to interfaith dialogue. And yet, even with our commitment to deeper understanding, there was a challenge to move our conversations beyond our similarities to explore the differences among our varied faiths and traditions. To get to a deeper understanding, we would have had to have moved through some really honest pain and probably a good bit of anger to engage in our significant differences. We would have had to commit ourselves to develop a deep trust for one another and a willingness to stay in the room and dialogue about those differences. And I think for all of us, the more personally challenging thing was that each of us would have had to be willing to move outside our own worldview to truly listen to and understand the other people in the group. Eboo Patel, in a speech at the University of Richmond, spoke to this issue, saying that we humans have to move beyond tolerance and simple pluralism to a place where we truly honor our differences. We need to engage with one another in such a way that our personal beliefs are touched by and hopefully reshaped by what we learn as we honor and respect differences of belief. When we stay engaged with people whose faiths and worldviews are different than our own, we do move beyond a simplified pluralism to engage the way the world's religions differ in regard to their understanding of ultimate reality, God, their understanding of the human soul, their ritual practices, their sacred stories, their institutional organization, and their artistic culture. Some of these differences are not just due to cultural differences, as Houston Smith argues, but reflect real differences in both theology and practice. Eboo Patel writes, to see the other side, to defend another people, not despite your tradition, but because of it, is the heart of pluralism. I think this is some of the most important work we Unitarian Universalists have to do in the larger world, to build understandings among people and faiths that are very different than our own. It's part of our work to save the world. We begin our work by understanding our differences. So one of the people who has written about the differences in faith traditions is Stephen Prothero, who in his recent book, God is Not One, argues that Houston Smith's vision of the many paths, one destination of liberal pluralism says that there's not one mountain that all people journey up, but several. There are major differences that are not reconcilable between the religious traditions. The problem with the one mountain understanding of pluralism is that when you ask someone what's at the top of the mountain, they invariably describe their understanding or experience of the divine from their worldview. For example, when pressed, a Christian will often describe the Trinity at the top of the mountain, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, which is not what a devout Jew or Muslim expects, nor does it match what they have already experienced in their life of faith or the sacred. If they did experience that, they'd be Christian. When we consider the major differences among the religions, one of the constructs that might be helpful for us is to look at Stephen Kaplan's understanding of the differences of religions in his book, Different Paths, Different Summits. So Kaplan says that there isn't one mountain, but there are in fact 3 mountains. We have enough work to do in understanding ourselves here without 3 mountains. But each of these mountains, he believes, has multiple paths going to the summit, and each has differing understandings of ultimate reality, religious life, and the nature of the soul. So I'd like just for a minute to talk about these 3 mountains. So the mountain that we're most familiar with growing up is one of theism. So on top of that mountain, even though you may find different things at the mountain, on top of the mountain, are Judaism, Islam, Christianity, and some Hindus. Now, from that mountaintop, the ultimate reality is a creator God who's eternal, personal, omniscient, omnipotent, loving. The belief about the human soul is that the human soul is separate from that greater reality and is created by God. The problem that human beings on this mountain face is that there's a separation from the Creator God. And for Christians, that separation comes because of sin. In Judaism, from exile. In Islam, by self-sufficiency. In Hinduism, from samsara. So the solution to the human problem is a combination of belief and practice that's revealed by God and leads one closer to God. Now, this is the mountain that most of us are familiar with. There's another mountain called monism. Now, monism comes in metaphysics from the reality that everything is a united whole, and that all existing things are part of a single concept or system. Or it might be defined as that mind and matter are formed or reducible to a single principle of being. So on this mountain, if we were to journey up it, we would find most Hindus, Taoists, and many Western mystics. The ultimate reality on this mountain is a very impersonal and eternal, unchanging source. The human soul is considered divine and eternal. The problem faced for Hindus is ignorance of our true nature, which keeps us in a cycle of rebirth. For Taoists, they believe that humans act out of a false self rather than acting out of their true self, which is one with the Tao. The solution is enlightenment through following the chosen yoga or path. Now, this third mountain over here, y'all might want to, some of you might want to climb up that one, but there's this other mountain over here, which is harder to pronounce. It's a process non-dualism. That's where the Buddhists reside. The ultimate reality there is impersonal and constantly changing. The human soul is an aggregate of constantly changing parts. The problem that humans face on this mountain is ignorance of our true nature, which leads to suffering and traps us in the constant cycle of rebirth. The solution is enlightenment through following the Four Noble Truths. So here we've moved from Houston Smith's one mountain, which I could manage, to like the beginning of a mountain range. So what do we do with all of this? We've got these three mountains upon which believers in many of the major religions find meaning. But I'm a Unitarian Universalist, and I can't settle for that. Even though it's a wonderful little grid, it leaves out many of the folks in this room because it only structures the major faith traditions. But if we're truly to honor diversity of belief, we have to expand beyond these three mountains, expand our pluralism, our worldview. This does offer, as I said, a perspective of the traditional religious beliefs, But there you use on all three of those mountains. And there are also Unitarian Universalists and others whose beliefs are missing in the structure. So where in that mountain range would we put indigenous people, agnostics, humanists, atheists, pagans? If we take in the whole landscape of human belief, then we might want to consider the fact that many people who are left out of the traditional construct might be those who don't even want to climb a mountain. They're happy remaining in the forest or the plain below because they don't envision that humanity has a religious problem that needs to be solved. They find meaning, or we find meaning, exactly where we are. And find meaning on the plain or perhaps the river valley. If one has no belief in or concept of a divine being, or if one feels no separation between the person and ultimate reality, or even believes that there's a divine reality, then really there is no need to walk up a mountain unless you just want to see the view from the top. And as a Universalist, I would say, because I am a Universalist, I would say that overarching all is the great blue dome of heaven, which probably several of our members are out enjoying this morning. Clearly, there are major differences among the religious traditions. Understanding that, however, it is also important to find a balance between honoring the differences and the commonalities so that interfaith understanding and dialogue can truly be nurtured. By holding the balance, we avoid the problem of shallow or false pluralism and encourage true understanding and dialogue. In order to find the balance and become a true pluralist, one's conception of God and the human soul is going to have to be much broader. So here is where our Unitarian Universalist faith can help interfaith understanding. Our faith, at its best, is broad enough so that we can honor true pluralism by acknowledging that each faith tradition leads to a different experience of the sacred and of the self. We must understand that our friend doing Buddhist meditation on Saturday morning or Tuesday evening right here will have a very different experience of the ultimate reality than our friend engaged in Christian prayer, or our friend on a retreat at an ashram, or our friend who is a humanist working in a soup kitchen. We also need to acknowledge that while we may disagree with the practices or traditions or rituals of believers in other faiths, people in those faiths see their practices as essential and life-giving. To quote Eboo Patel, religious pluralism is neither mere coexistence nor forced consensus. It is a form of proactive cooperation that affirms the identity of the constituent communities while emphasizing that the well-being of each and all depends on the health of the whole. It is the belief that the common good is best served when each community has a chance to make its unique contribution. So taking the time and energy to get to know those whose beliefs and understandings of religion are different from ours incorporates the stages that one goes through in developing any friendship. When we first meet someone, we find the ways that we are alike, common hobbies and interests. But then, if we decide that we really want to put time and energy into the friendship and find the depths that are possible in that friendship, we must begin to also understand the places where we disagree, where we're different. Then we can choose to be in a deeper relationship of mutual respect and affection. This is where our Universalist heritage and our Unitarian Universalism can be helpful. We can help facilitate the balance between the pluralism of our differences, where we honor the diversity of thought and faith, and honor the places where we find unity of action and belief. So as we come to understand other faiths, we're called to engage our humility. We're called to engage our humility so that as people of faith, we can truly listen and learn. In approaching people of other faiths, it's important as Unitarian Universalists not to project our experience of faith or belief onto others. We also need to respect that what we see as different can be life-giving to other people. We need to continue to stay engaged, going even into the uncomfortable, painful places, even when it feels scary. We need to acknowledge that we may not agree on some things, but that since every person's knowledge is limited, we need to agree to disagree and with humility acknowledge at times our inability to understand another person's worldview. There is the human tendency to look at the world from our own perspective, whether it be from the mountaintop or the river valley, because we often get so caught up in our own perspectives and egos that our ability to learn from those with different beliefs is diminished. There's some beliefs that are based on faith and therefore cannot be proven one way or the other. Though the poets try, the theologians try, our deepest beliefs cannot be disassembled for scrutiny like a mechanical device or contained in a beautiful, logical construct. So it's important for us to see faith from a larger view. This is one reason why we Unitarian Universalists gather, to learn from one another and to expand our understanding of life and faith by sharing with those whose beliefs are different. We must, each one of us must, expand and stretch our worldview to embrace both pluralism and unity. This is part of the calling for Unitarian Universalists, to be willing to move beyond the superficial levels to build deep relationships among faith communities, to honor our differences and to celebrate the unity found in our commonly held beliefs. This is what Francis David was trying to say when all those centuries ago in Transylvania, after days of preaching along with ministers of different faith communities, he convinced the king that even though people were diverse in their beliefs, there was unity among them. In this world, there have always been many opinions about faith and salvation. You need not think alike to love alike. There must be knowledge in faith also. Sanctified reason is the lantern of faith. Religious reform can never be all at once, but gradually, step by step. If they offer something better, I will gladly learn. The most important spiritual function is conscience, the source of all spiritual joy and happiness. Conscience will never be quieted by anything less than truth and justice. We must accept God's truth in this lifetime. Salvation must be accomplished here on earth. God is indivisible. Ege aj ishtin. God is one.